معلش يا شباب، البث وقف لوحده يعني. ما اعرفش وقف ليه اساسا. ف بعتذر إن البث قطع لوحده يعني غصب عني. سوري، هعتذر. مش عارف انتوا موجودين معايا ولا لا، بس يعني بعتذر انه قطع البث كده فجأة. معلش يا شباب، معلش انا قطع معايا كده. مش عارف ايه اللي حصل اصلا. ما انا معرفش ايه اللي حصل، فجأة قطع. بس الغريب ان هو ما قطعش على تويتش. يعني هو قطع على اليوتيوب هنا بس ما قطعش على تويتش. مش عارف ليه. هو هنا بيعندوا معايا مثلا. ولا هم عشان مع جوني ديب، فقال لك لا احنا نرخم معاه للراجل اللي هو مش واقف ضد جوني، ضد امبر يعني. صح. قال لك لا، لا، احنا عايزين جوني. سوري سوري، ايه اللي انا بعمله؟ ايه اللخبطه اللي انا فيها؟ اللخبطه دي قلبت معايا كده ليه؟ ثواني.
Each of these statements was simply that Ms. Heard's accusations against Mr. Depp were lies.
طيب هو كده
That's why
المحاكمه
he talks
شكلها
about an
بدأت.
abuse hoax. Now, Ms. Heard has the burden of proof of proving that Mr. Waldman's statements are false.
شكل المحاكمة كده
And that
بدأت.
means that Ms. Heard has to do more than prove that Mr. Waldman
البنت دي
got some details
تلغي.
wrong.
انا واقف على الشاشة دي ليه؟ يخرب بيت
She has to
الذكاء.
prove that Mr. Waldman's
انا
statements are
بعتذر والله على
false in their
اللخبطة دي يا شباب.
essential meaning. In
معلش
other words, she has to prove that her abuse
معلش يا
claims
شباب،
are
والله انا
not
مش
a
عارف ايه
hoax.
اللخبطة اللي
But
بتحصل.
as we've seen, the evidence is overwhelming that Ms. Heard's claims of abuse are false. We should also spend a bit of time talking about actual malice. It is Ms. Heard's burden to prove that Mr. Waldman's statements were made with actual malice. And actual malice means knowledge that the statements were false or reckless, and that's an important word, reckless disregard for the truth. But here, there is clear evidence that Mr. Waldman genuinely believed that Ms. Heard had committed a hoax. You watched him give the testimony by deposition in this case. He testified about the evidence he found persuasive, the numerous witnesses and the sworn depositions of the police officers who went to the penthouses that night and again saw no injuries. There is no evidence in this record, none, that Mr. Waldman acted with actual malice. He believed Mr. Depp. He believed the record. It's also important to understand that because Mr. Waldman's statements were not made by Mr. Depp, Ms. Heard needs to prove that Mr. Waldman was acting as Mr. Depp's agent. And within the scope of that agency, within the scope of the agency of the employment, when he made the statements, Mr. Waldman is a lawyer. Ms. Heard has not presented evidence that making those statements was part of Mr. Waldman's responsibilities as Mr. Depp's lawyer. There's nothing in the record. Ms. Heard is also claiming to be suffering from PTSD and claims that she has something to do with Mr. Waldman's statements. Ms. Heard wants you to believe that she suffers from PTSD because Mr. Depp purportedly abused her. But as usual, Ms. Heard is not telling the truth. As you heard from Dr. Shannon Curry, Ms. Heard does not have PTSD, and she does not act like a person with PTSD. Ms. Heard is an actress in a major film, involved in sommelier training. She just had a baby. Dr. Curry also found that Ms. Heard attempted to grossly exaggerate her symptoms during testing,
طيب يا شباب،
which
هو
is a
كده
sign of malingering,
هو كده
or said differently,
الفيديو
of
شغال
Ms. Heard
تمام؟
lying.
البث فيه أي مشاكل
Ms.
ولا
Heard
شغال
hired Dr.
تمام؟
Don Hughes to help her with this narrative. Dr. Hughes did not
وشكرا
catch
جدا
Ms. Heard's
لمجهود علي
exaggeration
بجد
during
والله.
testing because Dr. Hughes used an improper malingering screen test. She wasn't going to find it. One that is meant to identify an examinee's attempt to fake a severe mental illness or psychosis, not PTSD. Dr. Hughes diagnosed Ms. Heard with PTSD without administering the gold standard diagnostic test used for PTSD. She diagnosed her, think about that, she diagnosed her with PTSD before administering the test she admitted was the gold standard. 2 years after diagnosing Ms. Heard with PTSD, and curiously, shortly after Dr. Curry administered the gold standard diagnostic test in her evaluation of Ms. Heard, but before it was disclosed, Dr. Hughes decided to administer the gold standard, finally. Nevertheless, even after Dr. Hughes used the proper test, there were a number of deficiencies in her administration of that test. You saw them, including her failure to even follow the instructions that render her diagnoses unreliable. Ms. Heard's claim for monetary damages related to Mr. Waldman's statements, frankly, it's a fantasy. Ms. Heard speculates wildly that she has somehow been damaged by Mr. Waldman's statements, but in reality, Ms. Heard has not shown any damage at all that was because of or by Mr. Waldman's statements. There is evidence of a mountain of negative press coverage about Ms. Heard, including press reports about her defecating in Mr. Depp's bed, cutting off his finger, and putting out a cigarette on his face. But none of that has anything to do with Mr. Waldman's statements. And Ms. Heard has presented no evidence, none, of any film or other project that she has lost because of the statements. In fact, you heard from Warner Brothers president, Walter Hamada, who explained that Ms. Heard suffered no loss, none. No loss of compensation or other adverse effect on her major film, Aquaman 2. You heard it straight from him. Ms. Heard's expert, Catherine Arnold, testified, but for the statements from Mr. Waldman, Ms. Heard would be much more successful in her career. To form this opinion, Ms. Arnold compares Ms. Heard to actors such as Jason Momoa, the actual Aquaman, Chris Pine, Gal Gadot, and Zendaya. But as Richard Marx, who does deals every day, that's his job, not testifying here for a paycheck, does deals in Hollywood, and Doug Banya both testified that these actors are simply not comparable to Ms. Heard. After all, Jason Momoa, he was Aquaman. Chris Pine, he was Captain Kirk. Gal Gadot, Wonder Woman. Zendaya, she's been acting since she was 13 years old on the Disney Channel. And she's in every single Spider-Man movie. Further, the Q scores of these actors are not at all comparable with Ms. Heard's Q scores. As Mr. Banya testified, Ms. Heard's rating was less compared to these actors, and all of Ms. Heard's Q scores ratings were less favorable than the average of all performers. As you heard from Michael Spindler, because Ms. Arnold relies on the salaries of these comparable actors to calculate Ms. Heard's damages, Ms. Heard's claim for damages makes no sense. There's no connection. Further, and more fatally for Ms. Heard's damages claim, is that there's no connection to the Waldman statements, to Mr. Waldman's statements. Even if you find damage to her career, you have to connect it to the defamatory statements. There is no connection. Mr. Banya testified that all the negative tweets that Ms. Heard has entered into evidence have no causal connection to the statements underlying Ms. Heard's counterclaims. Specifically, Ms. Heard's expert, Mr. Ron Schell, presented a flawed methodology that included picking out hashtags at random, including justice for Johnny Depp. What does that have to do with the Waldman statements? And counting accompanying tweets even though it had nothing to do with Mr. Waldman. Ms. Heard's counterclaim is based on statements by Mr. Waldman, not Mr. Depp. Ms. Heard knows perfectly well that she hasn't suffered any damages from those statements, buried at the bottom of articles in a mere tabloid, the Daily Mail. And the statements are substantially true, since all they do really is point out that Ms. Heard's abuse allegations are false. Ms. Heard's counsel argued that Ms. Heard did not write the title of the online version of the op-ed, which stated, "I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change." It does not matter whether or not Ms. Heard wrote the title. You will recall from the court's instructions this morning that what matters is whether Ms. Heard republished the defamatory language. That instruction states in part that you should find Ms. Heard republished this article if she, quote, retransmitted the defamatory material with the goal of achieving a new audience. Stated differently, republication occurs when the speaker has affirmatively, that's important, affirmatively reiterated the statement. Ms. Heard affirmatively reiterated the statement. She posted it on her Twitter. If we could please pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 3. This is the tweet Ms. Heard sent. She retweeted the Washington Post tweet to a new audience, her own Twitter followers. And she affirmatively reiterated the statement by proudly declaring, "Today I published this op-ed in the Washington Post." She didn't quibble with the title. She said proudly, "Today I published this op-ed in the Washington Post." The title of the op-ed was prominently displayed in the tweet. That is enough for you, members of the jury, to find that Ms. Heard republished the title of the op-ed and adopted the statement as her own. She can and should be held liable and responsible for that statement. Ms. Heard tries to make something out of the fact that Mr. Waldman reported her to law enforcement in Los Angeles for perjury after her allegations of abuse were made against Mr. Depp. But I'll submit to you that all this proves is that Mr. Waldman believes Ms. Heard has committed perjury. Mr. Ronborn argued that the lack of supporting evidence for Ms. Heard's allegations of horrendous, constant abuse is somehow not something to be considered. That it is shameful for you to consider the fact that she didn't document all the terrible injuries that she claims to have suffered. That is a twisted argument. First, you know, because you have seen and listened to Ms. Heard in action, that Ms. Heard is a woman who's documenting things throughout their relationship. And it is instructive that the things she chose to document had nothing to do with violence. She documented Mr. Depp sleeping. She documented lines of cocaine, featuring prominently Mr. Depp's loan-out company, or production company, Infinitum. Stage photographs, that's what she documented. Mr. Rottenborn's entire argument assumes that Mr. Depp, a man, should be disbelieved because despite the fact that Ms. Heard can't support her accusations with actual evidence. What we have put to you, the jury, is not that because Ms. Heard didn't take enough pictures or tell people about abuse that it didn't happen. What we have put to you is that given how brutal and constant the abuse Ms. Heard claims, she would have had serious injuries. That's a fact. She would have had serious injuries that would have been observable in the pictures we looked at and by the witnesses we heard from, and would have required medical attention. That's it. Ms. Heard testifies to injuries that multiple people didn't see. What you have in the end is Ms. Heard's word. Do you trust it? We are not here because Ms. Heard told the world Mr. Depp was verbally abusive. This is not about the words used by Mr. Depp. We are here because Ms. Heard told the world that Mr. Depp was physically and sexually abusive. That's what Ms. Heard was saying in the op-ed. On May 27th, exactly 6 years ago today, 2016, Ms. Heard walked into court with a mark on her face to tell the world that her husband was abusive. She renewed that falsehood in her op-ed, describing herself as a public figure representing domestic abuse. And she published the op-ed, including the title, claiming that she spoke up against sexual violence.
everyone
knew who she was talking about when she used those words. She was alleging physical and sexual abuse. She was not alleging emotional or psychological abuse. She was alleging physical and sexual abuse. Ms. Heard cannot run away from her own allegations now. You have all heard the evidence of what she alleged against Mr. Depp in 2016. And you have all heard her incredibly dramatic, over-the-top story of physical and sexual abuse. That story was a defamatory lie. Ms. Heard tried to argue that you only need to find that Mr. Depp might have touched Ms. Heard once in order to find in her favor, because that makes her a victim of abuse. But common sense should tell you that you can't pick and choose Ms. Heard's allegations. You saw her on the stand. We all did. She gave the performance of her life, telling you story after story of abuse. And not just any abuse, but extravagant, over-the-top allegations of abuse that would be truly brutal, horrific, if true. You either believe all of it, or you believe none of it. Either she's telling the truth, including in her most extreme allegations, or she's lying. Either she was raped by a bottle, or she's the sort of person who would get on the stand in this courtroom and lie to you and the world about being raped. And if she would lie about that, what wouldn't she lie about? You can't find that Mr. Depp hit her once. Either he hit her countless times, or you can't believe a single word that comes out of her mouth. And what is the actual meaning of Ms. Heard's op-ed? That's an important question. It's not that Mr. Depp said a nasty word to her once. It's not that Mr. Depp might have hit her once. It's that she is a representative of domestic abuse. And by extension, Mr. Depp is a representative of abuse perpetrators. Words matter. Ms. Heard has shown you a lot of text messages from Mr. Depp with some very vivid language. As I told you at the start of this trial, Mr. Depp has a unique style of writing. He uses words I don't use. And you probably don't use either. But as you also heard during this trial, Mr. Depp writes in that way, in part because he modeled his writings on literary giants like Hunter S. Thompson. And he's got a dark sense of humor. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's who he is. And Mr. Depp owns text messages. He acknowledges that he said those things, and he said things that he shouldn't have. But using bad language and colorful humor does not mean that you are a violent abuser. And ironically, as much as Ms. Heard is trying to use Mr. Depp's words against him, it is Ms. Heard who repeatedly admitted to violence. In her own words. You've heard the tapes. You've heard her admit to violence. Ms. Heard can try to distract you with text messages showing that Mr. Depp uses bad language and has a dark sense of humor. But none of that, I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, none of that is evidence of abuse. Hitting your husband is evidence of abuse. Mr. Ronborn talked about the burden of proof. Let's talk about that for a minute. Mr. Depp only has to show that it is more likely than not, that the statements in the op-ed are false, that it is more likely than not that they have a defamatory implication, that it is more likely than not that Ms. Heard designed and intended the statements to refer to Mr. Depp. And the evidence on these points is clear. Ms. Heard made these allegations 6 years ago today, May 27th, 2016. She went out of her way to make them public, tipping off TMZ, When she published the op-ed, she was reminding everyone in Hollywood and the world of her abuse claims. And those claims are a lie. Consider what the true purpose of the article. Mr. Ronborn said it was to promote legislative reforms. But what was it actually? The evidence shows it was to promote Ms. Heard. It was timed to be released at the same time as Aquaman on December 21st, 2018. And it was timed to coincide with her announcement of her ambassadorship at the ACLU for women's rights. That's not a coincidence. It was designed that way. That was not a statement about legislative reforms. This was about burnishing Ms. Heard's reputation at the expense of Mr. Depp's. It was about Ms. Heard continuing to portray herself as a heroic survivor of abuse. And on the question of actual malice, that just means whether or not Ms. Heard knew the allegations were false. Ms. Heard knows perfectly well that she wasn't abused. She has direct knowledge of that. She was in that relationship. So actual malice is easily established. You may have noticed that no one showed up for Ms. Heard in this courtroom other than her sister. Every other witness who traveled to Virginia for her was a paid expert. This is a woman who burns bridges. Her close friends don't show up for her. Mr. Rottenborn tried to discredit Mr. Depp's witnesses by suggesting they're all on Mr. Depp's payroll. So he doubled down on the hoax theory, that everyone's just lying. First of all, it's not even true Keaton Wyatt is on his payroll. Ben King isn't on his payroll. Officer Melissa Sines isn't on his payroll. Morgan Tremaine isn't on his payroll. Officer Tyler Haddon, he's not on his payroll. Beverly Leonard, Alejandro Romero, Brandon Patterson, Morgan Knight, none of those people are on his payroll. And Kate Moss is most definitely not on Mr. Depp's payroll. Ms. Heard wants you to believe that all these people are lying. Let's talk about the Boston plane. Ms. Heard wants you to believe that the recording you heard is from the Boston plane flight. But that's quite telling. What did Ms. Heard capture of this supposed rampage? Mr. Depp moaning in distress? That's what she chose to record. What sort of person records something like that? What sort of person takes pictures of their husband or boyfriend or fiance who's struggling with sobriety, nodding off with ice cream dripping down his leg, his hand in his pocket, or asleep on the ground? What sort of person does that? Definitely not someone that's afraid of him. And Ms. Heard's attorney told a story of May 21 that was completely, utterly inconsistent with the testimonies of Officers Sines and Haddon, who testified clearly that they saw no signs of injury, no sign of property damage. And she told a story about how Officer Sadanaga's testimony was also wrong. She testified that the report was only required in case of a crime. Ms. Heard's attorneys tried to tell you that Mr. Depp apologized on May 22nd because he had hit Ms. Heard. Mr. Depp didn't apologize to Ms. Heard on May 22nd for hitting her. He apologized because he was leaving Ms. Heard. And this was a woman that, in spite of all her violence and all her rage, Mr. Depp, he loved her. He had been with her for years. Of course he apologized when he finally broke it off. Ms. Bredehoff also tried to tell you that Ms. Heard did everything in her power to keep the authorities away and to not get Mr. Depp in trouble on May 21st, 2016. Take a minute and think back to what Ms. Heard did 6 days later, 6 years ago today. She walked into court with a visible mark on her face, not wearing makeup that day. She tipped off TMZ, she made it public, and she showed up on the cover of People magazine with a mark on her face. Was that protecting Mr. Depp? Or was she trying to destroy him? Mr. Rottenborn asked you to consider why you're here. So why are you here? You're here because of a lie. And that was a lie that Ms. Heard repeated in the op-ed. At the start of this trial, we told you that this trial is about the evidence. The evidence overwhelmingly shows that Ms. Heard is an abuser and that she is a liar. She lied about Mr. Depp and took on the role of a lifetime as a public figure representing domestic abuse. What is her best evidence of that abuse? A video of Mr. Depp banging cabinets around, and text messages of Mr. Depp using bad words and dark, ugly humor, but never once admitting to abuse. Pictures of Mr. Depp sleeping. That's her best evidence. Ms. Heard herself, Ms. Heard held herself out to the world as a representative of abuse survivors everywhere, the face of the Me Too movement. This is not a Me Too situation. There are no Me Toos, just not me's. Ms. Heard does not deserve to be known as a representative of survivors of abuse, and Mr. Depp does not deserve to be known as a representative of perpetrators of abuse. That is what this case is about. It's not about money. It's about giving Mr. Depp his life back 6 years ago when she took it away. While you deliberate, ask yourselves why Mr. Depp would put himself through this. Expose every embarrassing detail of his life on national television. If he was guilty of anything that Ms. Heard accuses him of. We ask you, we implore you, to render a verdict for Mr. Depp. We ask you to set the record straight, that he is not the abuser she described, and that she is not the heroic survivor she portrayed. And we ask you to tell Ms. Heard that what she did was wrong. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Great. Thank you, ma'am. Rebuttal closing?
How about that?
Yes.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's interesting that in both their opening and their rebuttal closing, that you heard Mr. Depp's attorneys address none of Ms. Heard's witnesses. None of Ms. Heard's witnesses. They listed their own, who didn't see, who are on his payroll, weren't there behind closed doors with him, but they didn't address any of the witnesses. For example, Josh Drew, Rocky Pennington, Liz Mars, who were all there on May 21st, Melanie Iglesias, who covered Ms. Heard's bruises. They say that no one showed up for her. No one showed up for her, but then they say that these people aren't friends anymore. If they're not friends anymore, then why would they be doing what they would suggest are lying for her? Why would they be corroborating everything that she says? It's this simple. If you believe that Depp was abusive to Amber one time ever, in any of the various forms of abuse, not only physical, verbal, emotional, psychological, sexual, any of the ways of abuse, then your job is very easy. And you can not only deny Mr. Depp's claim, but you can fine for Amber on her counterclaim. And it's interesting that Ms. Vasquez just changed their theory after 6 weeks. She said, oh, well, domestic abuse just means physical abuse. It's not what Mr. Depp said. It's not what Dr. Curry said. It's not what Dr. Hughes said. It's not what you know to be true. You know that the evidence that you've seen constitutes all sorts of abuse. And there's a reason that they're running as fast as they can from those sorts of abuse, because they know that he did it. Now, the suggestion that Amber's abuse allegations are a hoax is vicious and vile. Mr. Depp can say whatever he wants now, but he can't change the evidence that you've seen at the trial. The evidence shows that Ms. Heard did not commit abuse hoaxes. Not about sexual violence, not about May 21st, 2016, and certainly not about Mr. Depp and Mr. Waldman's catch-all, all-purpose statement that Ms. Heard's abuse hoax, which suggests that every one of her allegations are false, that that's coming to an end. The evidence shows she did not commit any of those hoaxes. The evidence shows that she was abused exactly how not only she, but her witnesses supporting her claims say that she was, and their witnesses even, who claim that Mr. Depp abused her. Ms. Vasquez talked about actual malice. She says because Mr. Waldman was acting as Mr. Depp's agent, you have to look at Mr. Waldman. They're standing in the shoes of one another. And as Mr. Depp's agent, Mr. Depp's malice is Mr. Waldman's malice. Mr. Depp's malice is Mr. Waldman's malice. He acted with actual malice when he made these statements. Now, after years and years of Mr. Depp controlling the roles that Ms. Heard took, Ms. Heard had the biggest hit of her career 3 months before she was sued. She had withstood Mr. Depp's attempt to have her fired from Aquaman and his own jealousy as his career went down the drain before her op-ed for reasons having nothing to do with Ms. Heard. But once the lawsuit against Ms. Heard was filed, his campaign that he promised to destroy her entered a new phase. And then it reached a crescendo when Mr. Depp and Mr. Waldman decided to meet with the Daily Mail together and decide to plant statements that were defamatory of Ms. Heard in the spring of 2020, leading up to the UK trial. You've heard Amber and her agent, Jessica Kovacevic, talk about the impact to Amber's career. She can't get hired because of the negative treatment she gets. Studios like her, co-stars like her, she tests well, but she can't get opportunities because of the negativity associated with Mr. Depp and Mr. Waldman. You heard Amber Heard on the stand yesterday telling you exactly what she has experienced as a result of Mr. Depp's promise to bring her global humiliation. That promise, to paraphrase Catherine Arnold, Ms. Heard's damages expert, that promise was a spark. And that promise he kept because he had told her again and again, the only way out of this is death. And when she chose a different path out of it, he decided to make that promise. He decided to throw that spark. And when Mr. Waldman became involved, that spark became a forest fire. That forest fire has continued to this day. We ask, ladies and gentlemen, that you hold Mr. Depp accountable for his actions. Stand up for victims of domestic abuse everywhere who suffer in silence. Stand up for the freedom of speech, the freedom to speak about your life that the First Amendment protects. Give Amber Heard her voice back. Give Amber Heard her life back. Thank you so much for your service on this jury.
Thank you, Mr. Rottenborn. Members of the jury, this is an important case to both the plaintiff and the defendant. In order to reach a verdict, each of you must agree on that verdict. In other words, your verdict must be unanimous. The first thing you should do when you go back to the jury room is to select a presiding juror. The role of the presiding juror is to see to it that the deliberations are conducted in an orderly and businesslike manner, that they are conducted only in the jury room when all the members of the jury are present, and that each juror has the opportunity to fully and fairly express his or her views. It is rarely helpful for jurors upon first entering the jury room to take a straw vote, or for any juror to make an emphatic expression of his or her opinion in the case, or to announce a determination to stand for a certain verdict. To do so before all jurors have had an opportunity to consult with one another and exchange views and opinions might allow your sense of pride to prevent you from retreating from an announced position, even when shown that such position is unsound. You have a duty to consult with one another and to deliberate with the objective of reaching an agreement, if it can be done without offending your individual judgment. Each of you must decide this case for yourself, but only after an impartial consideration of the evidence with your fellow jurors. In the course of deliberation, a juror should not hesitate to re-examine his or her views and change his or her opinion if convinced it is an error. However, none of you should surrender your honest conviction as to the weight or effect of the evidence solely because of the opinion of your fellow jurors, or for the mere purpose of returning a verdict. In the jury room, you will have the exhibits that were entered into evidence. You will also have the instructions of law that I just read to you, and you will have the verdict forms. You'll also have a laptop, and that laptop will have just 2 files on it, and Deputy Lusa will set it up for you in the jury room. One is the plaintiff's files for audio and video files, and one's the defendant's files for audio and video files, and you'll be able to hear and watch those as well, the ones that were submitted into evidence. During your deliberations until you are discharged from jury service, you must not communicate with or provide any information to anyone who is not a member of this jury by any means about this case. You may not use any electronic device or media to conduct any independent research about this case, the legal or factual issues in the case, and the individuals or attorneys involved in the case. You are not permitted to consult dictionaries or reference materials, search the internet, visit websites or blogs, or use any other tools to obtain information about this case or to help you decide the case. Do not try to find out information from any source outside of the testimony and the exhibits received as evidence during the trial. You will also have, I know the attorneys discussed briefly about the verdict forms. You'll have 2 sets of verdict forms, one
يعني
for
حتى الكاميرامان بيبص على جوني يعني بص يعني مش عارف اقول
Now,
لكم.
when you have these verdict forms, the first 3 pages of both verdict forms have each of the statements separately. Okay, so when you're going through it, you're going to look at each statement separately and answer the questions that are on the page, okay? Now, if you decide yes for every question for a statement, then that's when you go to the last page of the verdict form, which is for damages. So, for example, if you find yes for all of statement 1, then you could go to 4 and 5 for damages. If you find yes for all of statement 1 and statement 2, you still go to 4 and 5 for damages. If you say yes for statement 1, statement 2, and statement 3, you obviously go to 4 and 5 for damages. If you answer no on any of the pages for any of the statements, you don't go to 4 and 5, okay? So that will be for all of them. And then when you do come to a verdict, make sure the foreperson signs it and dates it, and then just let the deputy know about that, okay? All right, now, for the tough part, you may remember at the beginning of this case, I told you we would randomly select 4 people to be the alternates, okay? We still have 2 alternates left, and the numbers were placed in an envelope from the very beginning of the case. So let me just say before I release the alternates that I know that this trial has been a huge sacrifice for all of you, and I have taken, and you've taken away from your life for weeks on end here. And I know I speak for all of us associated with the case, and I want to thank you for your service in this matter. I know how hard it is to come this far and then not get a chance to deliberate, but that does not lessen the respect and admiration that we have for you. As an alternate, you will not deliberate, but you are still under order of this court not to do any outside research in this case or to talk to anyone about this case at this time, and you're still under your oath as a juror. That is because if something happens to a juror during deliberations, I will call you back for service, and you will join the deliberations, and they'll start again, and you'll be part of the jury. So you are under these restrictions and your oath until a verdict is
على فكرة ده من البست
reached. We will contact you once this has occurred, and then you'll be free from your obligations, okay? But again, thank you for your service, all right? So in this matter, the alternate jurors are juror number 3 and 18, all right? So at this time, those jurors are excused, and also the remaining jurors can retire now to the jury room to begin their deliberations, okay? So thank you all, okay?
has been absolutely phenomenal all the way through, just outstanding with everything. We really appreciate that and appreciate it.
All right. All right.
That is one thing on which, Ms. Prederhoften, we respectfully agree. Completely agree. Completely agree.
Well, good. I'm glad on the last day we finally have an agreement.
Thank you, Your Honor. We're very grateful. Thank you.
You want to approach? Or
مش بقول لكم هو في الاخر جوني ديب هيلبس وامبر هتلبس والمحاميه كامله هتمشي مع الواد اللي هو المحامي بتاع امبر وبس كده. كده انتوا سامعيني اساسا؟ انا عمال اتكلم وانا قافل المايك. ثواني بس وهرجع تاني. طيب انا هشوف قناة تانية بقى شغالة، عشان ايه القناة دي كده بتستهبل، وهرجع لكم تاني. ما اعرفش، مش عارف يا تويتر ولا. طيب انا هجيب البث ان شاء الله من مكان تاني، اصبروا بس علي. شكله اليوم الحكم طيب احنا كده كده في حالة انتظار يا شباب، تمام. فتقدر تقول كده انا ليه عامل على تويتش؟ خلي المركزية على هنا احسن، خلي المركزية على هنا احسن. طيب بصوا، انا دلوقتي ايه، اللوجو نجيبه كده بس كده. بصوا يا شباب، انا دلوقتي احنا دلوقتي في الانتظار. خلاص القناة دي شغالة ومش هتقطع تاني. انتوا كده شايفين حبي حاليا قاعد يتناقشون. تمام، انا بتكلم هو دلوقتي اصل القناة التانية قفلت خالص. شكرا علي، شكرا لصاحب القناة، ما قصرت يا حبيبي والله. اكتر واحد تعب هو علي، ربنا يبارك له. انا عن نفسي
Emotional abuse by Miss Heard during their relationship. And when their relationship was over, Miss Heard inflicted the greatest and cruelest injury of all.
لا انا الاصوات دخلت في بعض، سوري هي دي القناة اللي هيبقى تمام، لان التانية بيجيبوا حاجات بيرجعوا. المهم، عايز اقول حاجة، عايز اقول يا شباب، علي، يعني انت فاتح قناة اصلا؟ انا مش قادر اخش على القناة بتاعتك لان انا دلوقتي فاتح الاستوديو. انت عندك قناة اصلا بتقدم محتوى معين؟ يا ريت تجاوب عليا. انت عندك قناة بتقدم محتوى؟ انا رجعت انا اهو الفيديو ده اهو، دي من قاعة المحكمة، لو في اي جديد هيبان هنا على طول. لا ما عندكش. انا كنت عايز اقول يعني الراجل تعب، انت تعبت معانا النهاردة. كنت عايز اقول لو في حد يعني من الموجودين يقدر يروح يعمل لك اشتراك وكده، لانك انت تعبت معانا وكده، وحبيت ان انا اقول لك شكرا بس بطريقة تانية يعني. مش عارف مش عارف اشكرك ازاي غير ان انا اقول لك يعني انت تعبت معانا ومتشكر ليك جدا. بس عايز اقول لك حاجة بقى يا علي، دي الهدية اللي انا اقدر اقدمها لك، وانا متأكد ان هي هتفيدك. عايزك تتابع القناة عندي، لاني انا هساعد كل الناس اللي عايزين يقدموا محتوى عربي، ان انا هقدم دورة مجانية، كورس مجاني المفروض ان هو بفلوس، عن طريقة المونتاج وتعلم برامج ادوبي بشكل عام، كل برامج ادوبي، عشان تعرف تعمل ديزاينر صور، تعرف تعدل على الصوت، تعرف ازاي تمنتج الفيديو، وازاي تصدره، وحاجات كتير. انا هبدأ ان شاء الله دورة تعليم كل برامج ادوبي ببلاش. وفي القناة عندي هتلاقي في فيديو بيعلمك ازاي تنزل كل برامج ادوبي من غير فلوس. اتفرج عليه وان شاء الله. هو ده اللي انا اقدر اعمله يا مروه. طب انا اعمل ايه؟ بحاول ان انا اقدم حاجه يعني. والله انت اللي تعبت يا صاحب القناه، صار لك 6 ساعات تبث. الله يوفق، الله يكرمك، متشكر ويرزقك ان شاء الله. شكرا يا ام اند اتش. متشكر يا لما. عادي والله، متونس بالترجمه. طب كويس. عاصم محمد، المحاكمه لسه ما خلصتش، هينطقوا الحكم بعد التداول الاراء كمان شويه. كم شهر صار لها القضيه؟ لا هي شهر واحد. شكرا إلك، بس حاسبة ما عندي أصلا. يعني إيه حاسبة ما عندي؟ عبير التداولات يبي لها ساعة مو أقل. أدينا منتظرين. أكو بالبث مباشر الرسمي، أكو لقاء. ما هو بيحصل حاجات، بس هو الصورة اللي احنا شايفينها دي صورة من المحكمة نفسها. أول ما يحصل أي كلام رسمي هيجيبوا البث على طول. ما أعرف ويا منو وإيش صار. لا القاء، ما فيش حاجة اسمها قناة رسمية تجيب لك لقاء، ما فيش الكلام ده. لا ما يحتاج فضول قلبك. ما احتاج. لا ما يحتاج. انا مش فاهم، ما تأثر والله. مسوي شي بالعكس، راح هاي اللي مش فاهم اخر رسالة منك يا علي اللي انت حاط فيها قلب دي. شمشون الحكم يصير الأسبوع الجاي. لا اهي اهو البث رجع شكله كده هيكملوا دلوقتي. بعد ما يخلص البث ويعلن الحكم أنشر المقطع في القناة. ما الحكم لأن حنام. اوكي حاضر يا مرة. والله لا اسجلها وانزلها حاضر. اهو هو دلوقتي على فكرة حاسس ان هم رجعوا البث شكله كده في حاجة. بص 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 الحكم دلوقتي على فكرة يا مرة لو تنتظر شوية. اه حاسب فهمت. لا يا بي 1 وبي 2 النهاردة شكلها كم لهم يتشاورون. حماس. هو شكله دلوقتي هينطق الحكم يا شباب. اول ما ينطق الحكم انا هقفل المايك عشان تسمعوا بقى. لا والله يا هيدر انا بعرف كلام كتير بس وقعت مني الحاسبة دي. انا كلمة حاسبة انا عارفها بس ما ترجمتهاش كلمة حاسبة اصلا. مش عارف والله. ايوه ايوه زي الافلام كده يا علي. ايه ده انا قافل المايك يخرب بيت الغباء. انا قافل المايك طيب ماشي. انا هسكت بقى ونتفرج بقى على الحكم وربنا يستر.
All right, thank you. Are we ready for the next witness, or do you want
Yes,
to?
we call Mr. Depp.
Okay. All right. So just a reminder, you're still under oath, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you, sir.
احب اقول لكم معلومة بقى هتزعل ناس كتير ان الحكم مش دلوقتي. ان دي مقطع قديم.
Good morning, Mr.
الصورة
Depp.
الحقيقية
Good
اهي
morning.
هنا تحت يمين اهي زي ما انتم شايفينها.
We heard
انا اسف.
a lot about some statements that Mr. Waldman made. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And Mr. Waldman is your attorney or was your attorney?
Yes.
Could we please pull up Defendants Exhibit 1245? And this is already in evidence, so permission to please
Yes.
publish. If we could scroll down to the
يا
second
شباب
page.
دي مش نطق الحكم ده. ها مش.
Mr. Depp, do you see the statement here attributed to?
Yes, I do.
When's the first time that you saw this statement?
All right.
We could pull the exhibit back up. Thank you. Mr. Depp, when is the first time that you saw this statement by Mr. Waldman?
The first time that I ever saw this statement was in August. It was when the piece was when she August 2020, when I was countersued by Ms. Hurd. This is the first time that I saw any of these statements.
Can we please pull up Defendants Exhibit 1246? And this is also already in evidence. Right. Thank you. If we could scroll down to the second page, or the third perhaps. Thank you. Mr. Depp, do you see this statement that's attributed to Mr. Waldman here?
I do.
And when is the first time that you saw these statements?
ايه ده يا جدعان؟
Same. When the countersuit was filed.
And could we please go to Defendants Exhibit 1247? And again, this is already in evidence. And if we could scroll down, please. Thank you. Mr. Depp, do you see the statement attributed to Mr. Waldman?
الجلسة الجديدة تحت يمين هو كده احنا بيسلونا يعني من الآخر لغاية ما تيجي يصدر الحكم يعني
This is the same. It's the counterclaim to August 2020.
After you saw these statements for the first time, did you form an understanding as to where they appeared?
I didn't, as to where they had appeared, these statements.
In what publication?
No, off the bat, I didn't know exactly. It just seemed like a lot of word salad to me. I didn't know where they'd come from, or I mean, where they ended up, or.
Mr. Depp, do you recall Ms. Hurd testifying that you did not assist her in getting her role in Aquaman?
Yes, I do, yes.
And what is your response to that?
It's not
بص اللي بيسألني بيقول لي
true.
انت رأيك مين اللي يفوز؟
Do you know
بص
when
لو
Ms.
انت
Hurd
حاطط في
first
دماغك
auditioned
انه
for
امبر ممكن
Aquaman?
تفوز ما تقولش الكلام ده في البث هنا لانه هيطلع عليك اسود
Strangely, I
ياكلوك.
know the day. Well, yes, I do know the day. Because
ما اعرفش. لو انت شايف انه امبر ممكن تفوز قول ما اعرفش زي كده. انا بس خايف على حياتك مش اكتر يعني.
My band, the Hollywood Vampires, we had done 2 shows at the Roxy, which is a place in Los Angeles, to rehearse for we were invited to play at the Rock in Rio concert, which is a huge rock and roll festival. So we did the 2 shows to go to Rio and play there. Miss Hurd wanted to come with me, and Whitney, her sister, had come as well. While we were there in Rio, we were rehearsing, getting ready for the show. Miss Hurd informed me that she would have to get back to Los Angeles for an audition, meaning it's basically after our 2-hour show or whatever, we would have to get on the plane immediately to make it back to Los Angeles for this audition.
بالظبط كده يا عبد الله عشان كده
And
بيقول لك
that audition was
كده بيسلوك لغايه ما الحكم بيصدر. البث الحقيقي هو اللي على اليمين تحت كده.
Whatever film it was.
And when were you performing at the Rock in Rio?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that was I believe it was the 24th of September.
In what year?
That was 15.
What do you understand happened after Ms. Hurd auditioned for Aquaman?
After Ms. Hurd's audition, or possibly auditions, for Warner Brothers and I suppose the creative team, Ms. Hurd expressed to me that the film was going to be, Warner Brothers had said that the film was going to be shooting in Australia. And Australia was for Ms. Hurd, that was a potential problem, which...
Objection, Your Honor. Your approach?
Okay.
I apologize, Mr. Depp. Could you please continue? What happened after Ms. Hurd auditioned for Aquaman?
I was informed by Ms. Hurd that the film was going to be shooting in Australia, and that was of
شكرا للشخص اللي عمل فولو. انا مش عارف اصلا اسمه، بحاول بس مش عارف الكلام مش واضح.
it was of concern
شكر طبعا على
to Warner Brothers.
يعني مش في تويتش هنا، انا في اليوتيوب مركز.
So she asked if I would, because I'd had a multi for a few years I'd had a multi-film deal with Warner Brothers, and so we'd been in business together. So I knew these people. I'd been on films with them. So she asked me if I would speak to them. I made a phone call and I spoke to.
Objection, hearsay, Your Honor.
I don't believe he said anything. I think he was going to say who he spoke to.
All right, we'll see. Overruled at this point.
I spoke to the three upper echelon Disney Warner executives, Kevin Tsujihara.
No one. انت باشا. صاحب قناة طلع شهادة جيسون مومو. خلي نضحك. ما اعرفش والله عرض، خلي اترجمه. ما اعرفوش والله، انا ما اعرفش هو ايه اصلا اللي انتوا بتقولوا عليه. ولكن انا عايز كل الناس اللي في القناة يركزوا مع كلمة تعليق الشخص اللي اسمه no one. تمام. بيقول لك ايه بقى؟ أنا هقراه بصوتي لأنه عجبني جدا بصراحة التعليق. أتمنى من الذكور حول العالم أن تعلموا، يعني تتعلموا الدرس مما حدث لجوني ويصبحون رجال، قصده وتصبحون رجال. أتمنى يعني من الآخر كده، أتمنى من كل الرجالة اللي في العالم تتعلموا من الدرس اللي حصل لجوني وتبقوا رجالة، وما تمدوش ايديكم على الستات وتحترموا الجنس الآخر.
Probably rather quickly.
Mr. Depp, I'd like to show you some pictures from the home in Australia that Ms. Heard testified about.
Sure.
Could we please pull up Defendants Exhibit 1817, which is already in evidence? Mr. Depp, do you recognize what's depicted in this photograph?
Yes, I do. That's the downstairs bar of the house we rented in Australia.
And can you please show the jury where you were sitting when Ms. Heard threw the 2 vodka bottles at you?
If I touch this thing, it'll make a
Yes,
mark.
it will.
Okay. So this chair, that one here, was over here. And it was in pretty much when I was turned around toward, they were on a swivel, so when I was turned around towards the bar, I'm facing the bar. When I turned around this way, this chair here was in pretty much exactly this same position as this chair. It was when I was facing Miss Heard, who was, let's say she was, if you're looking at the photograph, she would be about here.
Could you draw a line in the direction where Ms. Heard was relative to where you were sitting?
Yes, absolutely. So if I'm sitting here, she was over here, like back here.
Approximately how far away from Ms. Heard, from you was Ms. Heard, if you can recall?
I would say it was probably 10, 12, 15 feet, maybe 10 feet, 12 feet.
And approximately where was your hand when the vodka bottle hit it?
It was leaning. My arm was leaning on the marble bar, right there where the imaginary seat is, and leaning, kind of just leaning back and looking at Miss Heard. She just walked away with the second bottle. I mean, she walked this way when she threw the first bottle, which is actually visible in the background on the floor.
Yeah. Could you please circle where the first bottle is?
Oh, sorry, excuse me, yeah. All that is the exploded first bottle that went past my head. And the second bottle hit right up here where my hand was resting on the marble bar.
Can we please pull up Defendants Exhibit 1820? Mr. Depp, do you recognize what's depicted in this photograph?
This is behind that very bar.
And what do you see on the floor in this picture?
I see what looks to me like a some kind of napkin. It looks sullied, soiled, blood, I don't know. And I see glass in the corner, blood obviously on the floor, and a towel leaning up on something.
Do you know how that bloody tissue got on the floor?
My best guess,
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Do you know how the blood got on the floor, Mr. Depp?
I know how the blood got on the floor. It came from my dripping finger. So that's why the tissue is I'm 99.9% sure, since it is, looks like he's got blood on it as well, is what I held my finger with.
Do you see the wall on the left side of the photograph?
I do.
Was there a wall-mounted phone on that wall?
On the left side of the photo? No, I didn't. No. Not that I recall, no.
Could we please pull up Defendants Exhibit 394, which is already in evidence?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Depp, do you recognize this text message?
I do.
And what is this message?
It's a text to Dr. Kipper. I'm sorry, just reading through.
Certainly.
Yeah, this is my text to Dr. Kipper, who had just happened to be in town, telling him that I've had it, and that I just lost a fingertip.
How long after your finger had been injured did you send this text message, if you can recall?
It's hard to tell, because when I look at the timestamp, it says delivered 3/7/2015, 5 o'clock. But I know that because of Australia time, it was the 8th, and it was probably, the whole thing lasted probably until about 2 p.m. Or so, when that was when Kipper was called, Jerry was brought in, the judge, sorry, excuse me.
وعليكم السلام يا إيمان. ومعلش أنا
So do
بعدت
you have
شوية
an
عن
estimate as to how
البث
long
عشان أنا
after your
باكل،
finger had actually
بعتذر.
been injured that you
بس أنا
sent this
متأكد إنه علي
message?
قايم بالواجب وبزيادة.
I don't think it was very long. I think it
خلص
was
أكله بس
probably
وهرجع لكم تاني.
within the next, I'm sure it was in the next half hour or so. I would have had to sneak into a bathroom, lock myself in to type this out.
And how were you able to send this text message to Dr. Kipper in the state that you were in?
Well, he wasn't available at the time, so just sort of thumb your way through, don't you?
How long after sending this text message did you see Dr. Kipper?
I don't recall it. I think it took them probably 30 minutes or more, 30 to 40 minutes to get there.
And what did Dr. Kipper do when he first arrived at the home?
Oh, the first thing he wanted to do was inspect the damage of my finger and try and figure out exactly what had happened, how it happened.
And what did you tell Dr. Kipper about how your finger had been injured?
Objection, Your Honor.
We approach.
Hearsay. We've
right,
discussed
that's
this
fine.
several times.
That's good.
Mr. Depp, when Dr. Kipper was treating your finger, what did you tell him about how your finger became injured?
I told him that there was obviously, I mean, when you saw the damage in the house and everything, and the blood everywhere, I mean, obviously there was serious damage done. There would be no point in lying to the man. He'd been through it with me and Miss Hurd before. I told him that she had thrown a bottle of vodka and smashed and cut my finger off, the tip of my finger, just but a good chunk. I miss it.
Mr. Depp, you heard Ms. Hurd testify about an alleged incident of abuse on your honeymoon. Do you remember that?
I remember her testifying to that, yes.
And when did you and Ms. Hurd go on your honeymoon together?
I believe it was somewhere in the neighborhood of August, because I had just finished the film. Maybe end of July, August. I'm not quite good on the exact date.
Do you recall the year?
It was 2015, I believe.
And where did you and Ms. Hurd go on your honeymoon?
We took the Orient Express from Bangkok, Thailand to Singapore.
And what happened while you and Ms. Hurd were together on the Orient Express?
There were times when it was very agreeable, very nice. And then there were times when something had become dissatisfactory for her, and she would start the rant, the blooming of a fight would be on deck there, and at one point, it didn't. I mean, I don't remember it lasting long at all. I just remember that I took a pretty good shot to the face, to the eye, to somewhere up here. So I had a bit of a shiner. But it all ended, and then everything got fine again, and we'd go to dinner, and it was all fine.
Did Ms. Hurd ever apologize to you for giving you the shiner?
I don't recall.
Can we please pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 162, which is already in evidence? Mr. Depp, do you recognize this photograph?
I do. It was with the chef and the maitre d' and the staff were asking if they could take a photo with us, and they'd been very kind. They'd given us a private dinner card.
So where was this photograph taken?
That was in the, that looks like it's in the, yes, that's towards the back of the Orient Express. That's in the back train bar compartment. And just out back, you could smoke on the sort of caboose or whatever.
And what, if any, injuries do you have in this photograph?
I think the eye's a little bit bugged out, if you will. It's, yeah.
How did that happen?
These things could happen very quickly if you disagreed.
Objection, Your Honor, non-responsive. She just asked, how did that happen?
I believe he was about to explain.
Well, I'll sustain the objection.
Okay. So, Mr. Depp, specifically, how did the injury in this photograph occur?
I'm sure it hit me. Is that better?
Does this picture accurately reflect what you looked like on that date?
I don't look at myself much, but it certainly looks like me with a black eye. Yeah.
Does this picture appear to have been photoshopped in any way?
No, I think no. I think it would be difficult to photograph or to start getting into sort of digital processing with a number of people in the shot, especially in a wide shot.
Could we please pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 1301, and this is a new one, Your Honor, so this is not in evidence.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Depp, do you recognize what's reflected in this photograph?
Yes, this is the staff. It's the manager and his staff at the Raffles Hotel in Singapore. And before we left, they asked if they could take a photograph with us.
And when was this photograph taken?
Well, that would have been, we were off the Orient Express. We stayed in Raffles, I believe, a couple of days, few days. And then from there we flew to San Francisco.
So this photograph was taken after the photograph we just looked at?
This photograph was taken after the photograph in the dining car of the train, yes.
Your Honor, I'd move Plaintiff's Exhibit 1301 into evidence.
All right, any objection?
Happy honeymoon. So it's
Any
31st of October.
any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, 1301 is in evidence, can be published to the jury.
Mr. Depp, what, if any, injuries do you see on your face in this photograph?
I see pretty much the same. I see that the area in here has been is swollen, and yeah, there's a bit of a shiner there.
Thank you. We can take this down. Mr. Depp, do you recall Ms. Heard testifying that she punched you in the staircase incident because she thought of Kate Moss in the stairs?
Do I remember her saying that?
Yes.
Yes, I do. 3 times. Yes, I do.
Do you have any understanding as to what Ms. Heard was referring to?
Yes, I do.
And
as Kate Moss, Kate testified, it was many, many years ago. And exactly what happened is what she said happened. I recall speaking with Ms. Heard about that very incident because of the downpouring of rain, because it was raining very heavily that day that Kate slipped. And I recalled the story to her.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
May we approach Your Honor?
Okay.
Please continue, Mr. Depp. What did you tell Ms. Heard about the staircase, or Kate Moss?
I'll make it easy for Mr. Rottenborn. Ms. Heard took the story and turned it into a very ugly incident, all in her mind. There was never a moment where I pushed Kate down any set of stairs, yet she's spewed this 3 times before.
Objection, Your Honor. Ms. Heard simply testified that she had heard a rumor, and that's non-responsive to the question.
Sir, hold on. This
Sorry.
objection. I'll overrule the objection.
Misstates the facts and evidence.
I'll overrule the objection.
Sorry, I was drawn by Mr. Rottenborn's voice.
Certainly.
What would you like? What was it?
So what specifically had you actually told Ms. Heard about the incident with Miss Moss and the stairs?
Very simply that we were in Jamaica. I had left our bungalow about 3 minutes prior to her. I was standing outside, and suddenly rain starts just coming down like it's, monsoon. And then I remember looking and seeing Kate coming out the door, and there were 3 little wooden stairs, and she slipped, her legs went up, and she landed directly on her coccyx and her lower back. So, and she was obviously physically in pain, and she was hurt, she was crying. So I ran over and grabbed her to make sure she was all right. That's it. That's all I ever. That's the whole story. But then the rumor of it, I'd never heard a rumor of that before Miss Heard grabbed hold of it. It's like that. Sorry.
Mr. Depp, we heard testimony from Miss Heard's sister, Whitney, during this trial. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And how would you describe your relationship with Whitney when you were in a relationship with Miss Heard?
I liked Whitney very much. Initially, when I first met her, I liked her very much, and grew to love Whitney very much, because I always, it seemed, Whitney, Amber's sister, Whitney, seemed to always get the sort of dirty end of the stick, and I felt bad for her for that, because it wasn't new. It had been there for life, and that was seemed pretty obvious. So I took to Whitney very, very quickly, very easily. She was a very sweet kid. She was wonderful.
What do you mean that Whitney got the dirty end of the stick?
It was a kind of a strange combination of loving sister,
شباب تأخرت عليكم ولا حاجة؟
sister and friend, and then lackey,
أنا كنت سايبكم بس
and then, you know, either
والله جوني يكسر
bag
الخاطر
with the dartboard
حاليا قاعد
or the recipient
يطلع الحكم
of,
قريب إن شاء الله.
of some rather demeaning and ugly words, or she would have wine thrown in her face.
And who was the source of those demeaning words and the wine that you just referenced?
Well, that would be Amber Heard, her sister.
And how do you know that?
Well, I witnessed quite a lot of it. The wine in the face was something that happened in New York, which I think that even made it into the papers. I believe that even made it into the papers. It was in an elevator.
How did you first learn about that incident?
Miss Heard told me in detail.
What else did you observe of Miss Heard?
I could sense, I could feel that Whitney
شهادة
was
جيسون مومو
trying to please her
اكتب على
sister,
اليوتيوب
trying to
تطلع هسا واحد
be up
لازم
to
يبقى
snuff,
هنا
and
لأنه بأي لحظة يرجعون.
it just seemed like she got shot down.
Objection, Your Honor. This has gone beyond the
أنا
scope of
هسيب
the question
البحث ده زي ما هو.
and his foundation for knowledge of that.
Your Honor, I asked what he observed, you know, between them. I think this is responsive to that.
In his testimony as to what Whitney felt is
I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
Okay.
قرابة البيوت ومراته. مفيش حاجة بس.
Did you ever see Miss Heard physically attack Whitney?
مفيش حاجة دلوقتي يا باشا.
No, I've never seen any full-on blowouts, physical blowouts between them. Tons of verbal blowouts.
objection beyond the scope.
Overruled.
I've certainly seen Miss Heard grab Whitney, push her around. There were a number. There were half a dozen times when some of us, whoever was in the general vicinity, would have to leave. This is at Orange, when Whitney and Amber were living at Orange. Whitney and her boyfriend at the time, Sean Krajewski,
لا شهادة.
and
أنا بدور على
we
شهادة
had to leave the apartment and
Why
wait
was
in the car
شهادة
while they
جيسون مومو. عملت كده وبحثت
fought.
مش لاقي.
And when you say fought, do you mean physically or?
Physical.
And when you said Miss Heard would push Whitney around, do you mean that physically push her or metaphorically
Both.
You heard Whitney testify that she lived in penthouse 4 at the Eastern Columbia building for a time, correct?
That is correct, yes.
بص يا استاذ
How did Whitney come to live
شهادة جيسون
in penthouse 4?
وحاول تبطل الفيديو شوية.
My recollection when Whitney first came to stay at the Eastern Columbia building in penthouse 4 was she and her boyfriend Sean had broken up, and she needed a place to go, and so Amber asked if she could stay in penthouse 4, and I said, of course, you know.
How long did Whitney live in penthouse 4?
It was well over a year, on and off.
Did you ever ask Whitney to move out of penthouse 4?
No, I did not, no.
Why did Whitney ultimately move out of penthouse 4?
دي مش بث انت بتقولي بث.
It's his apartment, Your Honor. He was living there.
All right, your next witness.
انا هوقف البث ده يا شباب.
Whitney moved out of
لان ده قديم اصلا وهنشغل الفيديو ده. تمام يلا بينا.
All right, your next witness.
Oh shoot, I didn't know we were starting yet. Wait, almost got it. Perfect spot.
Okay, could you please state your full name?
Yeah, I am Jason Momoa.
Mr. Momoa, do you know Amber Heard?
I do. Hi, Amber.
Don't talk to her. So how do you know Amber?
We work together on Aquaman.
So you work together as actors, right?
No, as janitors.
Mr. Momoa, you have to take this serious. He's not a janitor, he's actually Aquaman. Did you say you felt safe around Amber on the set?
Sure, I guess.
So there was not even one incident?
Well, I wouldn't say that.
Why? What happened?
Well, Amber and I were in the pool recording a scene, and it was just the two of us. And she pointed at the water and said, "Look at that beautiful brown fish."
So what seems to be the issue? I'm not following.
Any wildlife in the water would be computerized, so that wasn't a brown fish.
I don't understand. What was it?
Well, it was, shall I say, Amber's turn.
Mr. Momoa, how do you even know what that was? Did you even take a picture of Amber's Heard?
No, I didn't.
So do you have any evidence?
Well, I made a replica. Yeah, here it is. Now, does that look like a fish? Nope. Man, how did that even come out of her body? Oh, man. Subscribe to GeoFilm. He does funny dubs. Yeah, this is all fake. Says dub in title. Description says fake. So, yeah. Let me know if you want to see more of this.
نرجع للمحاكمة أحسن.
That I don't, sorry.
That you do not spend very much money on charity.
Objection, Your Honor.
You just want to approach? Okay.
ايوه ماما الفيديو ده ما كانش كامل.
Mr. Depp, just to remind you, my question was, what is your response to Mr. Mandel's testimony that you do not spend very much on charity?
My response to that is Mr. Mandel is a very bitter man, and one thing about that myself personally, with regard to charity donations, sending money to a charity, I prefer, I would rather that my name were not on it. I don't want the name to be the important thing or the thing that people talk about. So when I donate money, I donate without my name being involved because I don't see that that's important, my name being there in terms of money. Now, if I am able to visit hospitals, or if I'm able to meet with Make-A-Wish children, I have held on to the relationships that I've held on to within the Make-A-Wish Foundation and the Children's Hospital and various other places. Then obviously my name is involved. When we held premieres in Leicester Square for several films, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Again, beyond the scope of his response to Mr. Mandel's testimony.
I believe this is in response to Mr. Mandel.
I'll overrule the objection.
So basically, when it was a public, let's call it a donation or whatever, I would talk to the studio, I would talk to Disney, I would talk to Warner Brothers, I would talk to whoever the studio was, well before the premiere, and make the premiere a benefit that would, once we did what we benefited, we did a benefit premiere for Great Ormond Street Hospital. We did a couple of benefit premieres for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. I mean, if you can turn a premiere with that many thousands and thousands and thousands of people there into a benefit, it works and it helps, but it wasn't presented under my name, you know. It was Disney's doing this or Warner Brothers is doing this. I'm not looking for the pat on the back, as it were. If I can make it happen, great. But I don't need the pat on the back. I don't need the adulation. I don't need the attention.
Did you hear Ms. Heard testify that one of the charities she donated a portion of your divorce settlement to was the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles?
Yes.
What is your relationship with the CHLA?
Objection, Your Honor. Irrelevant and to the
May
issue
we
just
approach Your Honor?
discussed.
Mr. Depp, what is your relationship with the CHLA?
That they saw it. So
I've had a relationship with the CHLA for probably 20 years or so.
And what's just the nature of that relationship?
Well, since you know, sometimes there are Make-A-Wish kids who are in the hospital there, and that their wish is to...
Objection, Your Honor.
Your Honor, may we approach?
Okay, sure.
Mr. Depp, I'd like to take you back to exactly 6 years prior to this week, the week of May 21st through May 27th, 2016. What happened at the beginning of that week?
May 21st.
Excuse me, May 20th.
May 20th. This is we're talking 2016 here.
Yes.
May 20th, the afternoon of May 20th, afternoon, evening, my mom made her exit. She'd been fighting cancer numerous times and for many years, and she fought all the way to the end. And so my mother passed away on the 20th of May. Which does bring instant perspective into one's mind. I spoke to Amber that night. I called her on the telephone, explained to her that my mom had passed, Betty Sue had passed, and that I thought that the best thing we could do was to that I file for divorce.
Hearsay. What Mr. Depp told Ms. Heard.
We can move on, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Depp, what happened at the end of that week on May 27th, 2016?
May 27th, my daughter's birthday. May 27th, I was not in Los Angeles. I was on the way to on tour, and that was when Miss Heard went for the restraining order. And oh yeah, also that was the day that Alice Through the Looking Glass, a film I'd done, was opening.
Did Miss Heard know that you were out of town on May 27th?
Yes.
And how would she have known that?
Well, I told her I was going on tour. I mean, that was well established.
How long were you going to be out of town on that tour?
2 to 3 months.
And did Ms. Heard know how long you'd be out of town?
I don't know if she knew exactly how long I'd be out of town, but it was a pretty extensive tour of Europe.
How did Ms. Heard's actions on May 27th, 2016 affect you?
Changed everything.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
Oh, it didn't change
to
everything?
This lawsuit.
Sorry.
Mr. Heard, if you could wait till the objection, please.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Relevance.
Tourette's.
Your Honor, this is one of the key dates. Mr. Depp, what has it been like for you to listen to Ms. Heard's testimony at this trial?
I'm sorry?
What has it been like for you to listen to Ms. Heard's testimony at this trial?
Objection, relevance, Your Honor.
Oh, overruled.
Insane. It's insane to hear heinous accusations of violence, sexual violence, that she's attributed to me, that she's accused me of. I don't think anyone enjoys having to split themselves open and tell the truth. But there are times when one just simply has to, because it's gotten out of control. Horrible. Ridiculous, humiliating, ludicrous, painful, savage, unimaginably brutal, cruel, and all false. All false. I wanted
تقريبا يا شباب دي القناة الرسمية، مش الرسمية، دي قناة كده يعني من أوائل القنوات اللي هي بثت المحكمة، مش الرسمية ولا حاجة، دي قناة
no
يوتيوب
human
زي
being is perfect, certainly
بس
not.
هنشوف بقى.
None of us. But I have never in my life committed sexual battery, physical abuse, all these outlandish, outrageous stories of me committing these things and living with it for 6 years and waiting to be able to bring the truth
أيوة لون كريم
out.
دي بالضبط.
So this is not easy for any of us. I know
بس دي
that.
مش رسمية ولا حاجة،
But
قناة.
no matter what happens, I did get here and I did tell the truth and I have spoken up
أهو
for
بص
what I've
ما
been
فيش، دي مش دي واحد بيتكلم بتاع ايه،
carrying
بص
on my back
شايفين الصورة اللي على اليمين تحت دي هنا اهو،
reluctantly for 6 years.
هي دي المحكمة.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right.
أهي.
Did you want to take
بتجيب
lunch at this
لقاءات
point? All right.
وبتاع،
Okay.
بس
All
هم
right. Let's
شكلهم
do
كده
that. All right.
فعلا
Ladies and
قربوا.
gentlemen, let's go ahead and take lunch this time. Do not discuss this case with anybody and don't do any outside research, okay? Thank you.
لو في حاجة هنشوف، أنا أقول لكم على طول. بص رغي رغي رغي، بس مفيش حاجة أكيد.
And don't break anything on your way out. Thank you. All right. So just a reminder that since you are back on the stand, do not discuss this case with anybody, to include your attorneys at this point, okay? If you could just have a seat back there. We do have some other issues to take care of. Before we take care of the third-party motion, can I have the attorneys come forward on our...
لسه مفيش حاجة يعني، مفيش حاجة لسه. لا لو عرضت القناة نفسها وشلت اللوجو بتاعي هاخد كوبي رايت. الصوت ده مزعج أوي. ده هما بيجيبوا اللقطات اللي من اللي فاتت يعني. ايوه النهارده بس هياخد وقت يا توت، هياخد وقت. هو تمام النهارده مفيش مشاكل. بس هياخد شوية وقت لغاية ما يعرضوا الحكم، لأنه أكيد لجنة المحلفين لازم ياخدوا قرارات بقى ويقعدوا ويسألوا ويستشيروا ويفكروا، لأنه أنت بتتكلم في إطلاق حكم مش لعب. ما فيش حاجة اسمها اعرض المحللين. المحللين دول يعني افتكرتك المحلفين. ماشي، المحللين ماشي اهي اهي تمام. ونقفل ده، سوري، نوقف ده ونفتح ده.
Streams and they can hide behind their names. Come up with names on Instagram where they can't readily be located, but they can be obviously, as with Twitter, taken off the social media platforms. And so I think that to put all of that, the onus on Johnny, that all the attacks that she's received verbally, the threats, they're not in direct result of things that he has done. I think that it's very clear to everyone that he is a much more established, well-known star than she is. And I agree that to the extent that you are a public figure, you are an actor, actress, you put yourself in that lane, in that zone. And I don't think that it makes it right for people to do the things and say the things that they do. But on the other hand, I don't think that even if she wins the case, that's going to stop. You know, and so I don't think that Johnny has any control over that, or his team.
Yeah, and I think the jury's got to weigh that and then think it through, like, you know, what was it like before, and what do you think it's going to be like after, and is this really a direct result, causal connection to something Johnny Depp has or hasn't done? Speaking of Mr. Depp, and he again took the stand this week, let's listen to some of his last performance.
No human being is perfect, certainly not. None of us. But I have never in my life committed sexual battery, physical abuse, all these outlandish, outrageous stories of me committing these things. And living with it for 6 years and waiting to be able to bring the truth out. So this is not easy for any of us. I know that. But no matter what happens, I did get here and I did tell the truth, and I have spoken up for what I've been carrying on my back reluctantly for 6 years.
So again, Johnny Depp from his last appearance on the stand as part of their rebuttal case. So Mitra, in some of the closing, I think this particular bite I'm thinking of was Camille Vasquez, where she led up to her list of witnesses that she believes supported Johnny Depp, and she said it by saying, this is not about whether you believe Amber Heard or Johnny Depp, and then she said it's whether you believe Johnny Depp and all of these other folks. But let's take the other folks out of the mix. How important really is it, when you boil this down, whether this jury believes Johnny Depp or believes Amber Heard?
I think it's everything, and I think that's what's the most difficult thing about this case, is that we don't have a ton of hard evidence. This is the kind of stuff that normally happens behind closed doors. And I'm watching Amber Heard's reaction, you know, as Johnny Depp is saying, I have told the truth and I'm here and I've said everything that I needed to say. And I'm looking at her and I'm just thinking, well, one of these two isn't telling the whole truth. And I wonder which one it is and who is, you know, what's going through one another's minds when they hear, you know, the other side really saying something that they believe is a complete lie. Because it's not that they are accusing one another of half-truth. They're outright accusing one another of lying. So I think that that's a difficult question for anyone to answer, because the bottom line is we don't have the hard evidence that corroborates either side, you know, completely.
Yeah, and you've got the very difficult, I mean, it would take a team of mental health professionals to get inside these heads. Some of the stuff they may have heard or told themselves often enough, they believe it. They believe every detail that they've recited. So in their minds, I'm telling the truth. So Depp thinks he's telling the truth. And Amber Heard thinks she's telling the truth. And you know, this jury now, as they deliberate, working on about an hour and a half now, they get to try to figure out who really was telling the truth based on all of the other corroborative evidence or the lack thereof. So good stuff, folks. I appreciate the insights. We're going to take a quick break here and come back. We'll talk more about Johnny Depp, Amber Heard, the trial that has consumed us for the last 6+ weeks, and now it is consuming this jury as they get down to the hard work of deliberating who's going to be liable in this case, if anybody, who's going to pay damages in this case, if anybody. We'll talk more about it when we come right back. Good to have you along. This is Law and Crime.
stand and wait.
I gotta get my key. I actually, well, yes, my experience on Twitter was I've been roasted, I've been but I find it hilarious. A lot of people say mean things.
Take care. Are one of them supposed to be coming out that door? Y'all know? I'm sorry. Are one of them supposed to be coming out?
Still lawyers.
Huh?
It's still lawyers. Yeah, right there. They haven't had a verdict yet. They're not the ruler. They're civil.
I'll make sure you have space.
Okay. You can be where you are. So you were in the scene? Yes. Okay, go back to 3 years. Our scene has got to be quick, okay? No, I know what my source is. Okay, call me back when you're okay? Earlier today, I was I'm sorry. It's pretty good.
Just like
Let me get up a picture. Let me get up a picture.
When they come, you're gonna be Senate, right? You can get that. Nobody. I'm in the back office. Hold on, let me
look at
Where did he go? Scott, just go for it.
Yeah, so there's like balance.
I'm like that.
And I'm gonna send you the address to send it to you. And then after Virginia, and zip code empty. And then I'm gonna give you the account number. No. I want it. There's more of those like this. Take a picture of it and let me see it. Thank you very much.
My husband was like, where are you?
Here we go.
تقولش امبر هتفوز، هتلاقي في اسود طلعت لك من الشات. انا خايف على حياتك يعني، ما تقولش الكلام ده. ولاد امبر هنا، قصدي ولاد جوني هنا شرسين جدا، خدام استاهل.
Tommy King will be throwing out stuff
That is how you digital natives are living. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Bodies with us.
Yeah. 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 Most of Europe. Yeah.
On Wyoming Avenue. I'm telling you right now. Also, guys,
All right. Okay. I thought the nurse was great.
Right, they're so good. You gotta think about how much, dragon.
I mean, I don't, I would, you know, if I were everybody, I would go good.
No, I might even do it. You gotta get that down.
Where are they?
I mean, like, that's kind of how I
Yeah, but I mean,
no.
okay, all righty. Okay, sounds good. But they say no one to.
You don't hold it together.
Well, then they said that they would lose it at all. So I guess you're saying, like, I'm sorry.
You know, because
Yes, I think the hell, I think yeah, the I cannot figure out what's going on. Yeah, at least really know important references. Yeah. Can't go like
Well, apparently it's set.
Huh?
Setting up.
Yeah.
Okay. All right then. Oh.
امبير هيرد هي اللي فازت. امبير هيرد هي اللي فازت بدور اكوامان في الجزء الاول. وانا مسموع عن كلامي ده. وعلى فكره احب افكركم بس انه الشتيمه في السر حرام برضه.
deliberating, I would imagine. We're going to hear relatively soon whether they're going to carry on further into the evening or call it and get back at it Tuesday after the holiday weekend. So welcome to extended coverage here. I'm Michael Bryant. You know, we know a couple of things, at least from what's been going on outside the courthouse. We've got our cameras there waiting for something to happen inside or outside. We know Johnny Depp left already. We also know that the judge has excused the litigants from being there for the verdict, which I think is odd under the circumstances. Shocked if they aren't both returning for that purpose, but maybe you know, if they're going to just bug out for the weekend, and that's what's going to happen. Who knows? We'll just keep an eye on things. You can see it's still rather hectic outside. Just a lot of people just standing around waiting with you know, that anticipation that could this be a very quick Friday afternoon type verdict. So as we get into this extended coverage here, it gives us a chance to recap some of the more interesting testimony from this trial. You might remember Dr. Shannon Curry. She took the stand in the main case for Johnny Depp, also in his rebuttal, and she talked about fellow Dr. Don Hughes' evaluation that Heard suffered from PTSD. Let's watch.
Dr. Hughes says that Ms. Heard has PTSD. Do you agree?
I do not.
Why not?
The results of my multi-method comprehensive evaluation based on carefully selected, researched, relevant test instruments, based on comparing those instruments to Ms. Heard's self-report, observing Ms. Heard's behavior over 12 direct hours of assessment, reviewing copious notes from prior therapists who indicated symptoms in their notes, reviewing the notes of Nurse Filati, previously Nurse Borum, who spent, I believe at one point, almost 2 months with Ms. Heard daily, reviewing the notes of her treating providers, let's see, all of the legal documents and discovery. There was no evidence of PTSD.
How is evidence of PTSD generally exhibited?
So really the bottom line in a forensic psychological evaluation is a change in functioning. That's what we're looking for. Again, I said we don't have a crystal ball. We're not wizards. We can't get into somebody's head. What we're looking for were there identifiable changes in the way the person engaged in their world. Were they able to keep a job? PTSD is an extremely disabling diagnosis. When a person has true PTSD, it is difficult for them to work. You'll see unemployment, job loss. It causes extreme levels of distress and impairment. There's divorce, there's isolation and estrangement from children, from family members, extreme alcohol abuse, often a string of sudden DUIs when the person never had any before. They become homebound, they can't go to the store. They're certainly not going to events. They're not having success in their film career, usually. They're not exercising every day, pursuing their hobbies, being avid readers, obtaining level 3 sommelier training, having dinner parties with friends, speaking to public groups. Those are just indications of very high functioning. And when you're looking for a decrease in functioning over time, that is inconsistent with that decrease.
Dr. Hughes had suggested that perhaps Ms. Heard's PTSD was somehow triggered. What's your view on that?
I would say that it can't be triggered if PTSD isn't present.
So quite an interesting kind of a side light here on the damages issue and the causation, you know, post-traumatic stress syndrome being allegedly caused by Johnny Depp's actions against Amber Heard. Very unusual. And then you have, of course, the two experts battling out whether or not she was suffering from PTSD. By the way, Heather Locklear will be playing Shannon Curry when this becomes a movie. So obviously we heard from Dr. Shannon Curry and her criticism of Dr. Hughes. Let's listen to Dr. Hughes.
Dr. Hughes, Dr. Curry also testified that a victim of PTSD has to effectively be prone and unable to function at all. Would you agree with that?
Objection misstates the evidence.
She said they couldn't hike, they couldn't move, they couldn't function in any shape, way, shape, or form.
Objection.
Thank you. No, that is not correct. That is often actually a myth and misconception about individuals who are struggling with PTSD or trauma-based disorders, and I'm often called to answer that and speak to that. People who are struggling with trauma and PTSD are very strong, courageous, resilient people, even though that they're struggling. They get up, they have to go to work and drop their kid off at school and go to the market, even though they're struggling with these symptoms. So I often talk about it as this sort of walking around with a 50-pound bag of flour on their backs, just sort of trying to get through the day, where sometimes that button's going to press play and the trauma is going to start activating in their head, and then they're going to be having to think about it and have startle and have physiological reactions until they can find a way to hit that pause and shut it off again. So they still have, impairments in other ways, but they go about their lives. They're not, totally debilitated. If you have someone in that high range, the highest score is an 80 on the CAPS, Ms. Hurd had a 28. If you have someone in the higher range, we have seen people who are, severely disabled because of it, but that's not the norm of people who have this moderate PTSD.
So the experts are battling here over the definition and the level of PTSD, which is kind of interesting because I think Karen Felicia.
مين اللي بيتطاول كده؟ يا ريت ترد عليا يا ابراهيم، بس انت بتقول لا ترد عليه قليل الحياة مش عارف ايه، قاعد يتكلم عن الصحفيين اللي برا. علق ابراهيم اللي اسمه، ايوه اللي اسمه ايه بقى؟ اللي اسمه نو ون. انا ايش دخلني؟ هو هذا اسمه ذاكرناك الله. يا ابن الكلب. ماشي يلا بعد اذنك يا محيان. واي حد بيهزر في الدين انا مش ناقص اخد ذنوب حد. ده هو بيستخدم الألاعيب دي من هذه. يلا بالسلامة. يلا
is here with
both physical and emotional from his mother. So I thought that there was something lacking in Dr. Hughes's testimony with regard to Amber's childhood, and how did that impact upon her later diagnosis as an adult of the PTSD?
Yeah, it seems that sometimes there's this sense of, hey, let's throw some more things at this jury, give them something to latch onto. Do you think the PTSD claim helped more or hurt Amber Heard's claim more?
I think that it hurt her more because of, as I indicated, where did it come from? And we wanted to hear specifically, we needed to hear, I think the jury especially needed to hear, how did that impact her life? Especially when we heard the information from Dr. Curry saying that it had to manifest itself in a certain way. And Dr. Hughes is saying, well, no, you're still able to go to the store, you're still able to exercise. So give specifics on how Amber's life specifically changed after leaving Johnny Depp. She was able to do this movie and did very well in the movie, and she seemed to function very well. So there weren't any examples or even witnesses, even from her sister, saying as a result of leaving or leaving that marriage, this is how Amber spiraled into a depression. We didn't hear any of that. So I think that did have an impact on the testimony of Dr. Hughes.
Yeah, I think it was a very interesting little route they took off to the side there that may or may not help the Amber Heard case. Hard to tell. The jury is now chewing that up, as well as everything else they've dealt with over the last 6 weeks. They're in that jury deliberation room. I would expect we're going to hear pretty soon whether or not they're going to continue into the evening or whether they're going to call it for the weekend. So stay where you are. We're going to come back, talk more about the case that has unfolded over those weeks and all of the drama included. We'll be back right after this. Stay where you are. have we made an editorial? And so as I continue, as you can now, to keep an eye on the camera outside the courthouse there, I don't know, I'm seeing some dwindling. I don't know if that's, you know, I didn't do an official head count, but it looks to me like maybe some folks are drifting off thinking you know, this is not going to happen today. So again, we will be here as long as the jury is there, and we will keep you posted. You know, both sides in this case, you know, we talked about the finger, the Johnny Depp finger, that middle finger on his right hand, which I'm always very careful to demonstrate properly. Both sides called orthopedic surgeons to talk about that finger. So let's start with Dr. Richard Moore. Amber Heard called this physician.
So back to the glass. In the records that you reviewed, Dr. Moore, did you see any adjacent injuries? In other words, injuries to any other part of Mr. Depp's hand other than the tip of his middle finger?
No.
And is that observation consistent with the explosion of glass type phenomenon that Mr. Depp alleges?
Well, I think in the setting of a glass explosion like that, where there's multiple fragments and the tip of the finger's cut off, you would anticipate that there would be other lacerations.
Did you review the documentation in the medical records from the hospital in Australia?
Yes.
Did any of those providers report retrieving glass from the wound?
No.
What about any glass near the site of the injury?
No.
What about any glass in other parts of the hand?
No.
What about any glass in any of the other fingers?
No.
Is there any reference at all, Dr. Moore, that you've seen to any glass in the records that you've reviewed?
No.
And Dr. Moore, in your decades of practice, have you ever seen an injury associated with a glass explosion that was focused on the end of a single finger in the way Mr. Depp describes?
Well, not consistent with the clinical images and the findings in this case, no.
Have you ever seen an injury associated with an alleged glass explosion where no other glass was found on any part of the patient's body or clothing or anything?
No.
Okay, so you got that. You've got that that surgeon's opinion in mind. Let's go to the other surgeon, Dr. Richard Gilbert. He was maybe has an alternative opinion. Let's watch.
In your view, what types of mechanisms can cause this sort of injury?
So this is a mechanism of injury that has high velocity or force, generally a crush type injury. A simple fall would not result in a comminuted fracture such as is seen in these x-rays.
And we're using the term comminuted fracture. Can we just define that quickly for us?
So again, comminuted, and it's not particular to a finger, is a medical term for a fracture that has multiple fragments.
In your opinion, could this injury have been sustained in the manner Mr. Depp described?
I do believe so.
And how might that work? How might a thrown vodka bottle produce an injury like this?
So a vodka bottle, which is a hard object, would have crushed the tip of the finger, resulting in the comminuted fracture. And in addition, as the vodka bottle broke, the glass would have lacerated the finger, resulting in the soft tissue loss that was also seen with this injury.
So this finger injury, as we're aware, took place in Australia, however it happened, and these doctors are really supporting one version of the story or another. The doctor suggesting it was a crush injury supports the Johnny Depp story, that a bottle was thrown by Amber Heard. He had his hand on the rail of the bar, and it smashed right where his middle finger was, and that basically ripped a chunk of his finger off the bottom, not the fingernail side. And Amber Heard's position is, no, he took a phone and was physically smashing the phone against the wall and therefore lost that piece of his finger. So the jury gets to decide which is the more reasonable. Karen Felicia Nance is here. Karen, you know, this was kind of one of my pet peeves as I kept hearing this injury talked about as a slicing of the fingertip. He lost his fingertip. No, he had a big chunk gouged out of the bottom as a kind of very typical crush injury, as I've dealt with many times in civil cases involving, you know, machinery more often than not. But it's consistent with a crush injury. How do you think the jury is going to handle this dispute?
Well, I think that in any case, right, when we have to go to the doctor and we're given a diagnosis, for example, somebody always says it's necessary to have a second opinion.
Hold on a second, Karen. Karen, I'm sorry. I hate to interrupt here. It sounds like something is going on inside the courtroom, perhaps an early dismissal. Let's go in live in Fairfax, Virginia for the day.
All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Since it's a long weekend for 3 days, you can sit down. Thank you. Since it's a long weekend for 3 days, I just want to come back in here and remind you your responsibilities, which are extremely important, especially now that you're in the deliberation phase, okay?
Oh my God.
So just a reminder that you're not to read anything about this case, you're not to watch anything about this case, you're not to listen to anything about this case. This applies to television, newspapers, magazines, the internet, and any online sites. Further, you're not to read, watch, or listen to anything about the case on social media sites, any blogs or similar sites. In addition, you must not communicate with anyone about the case, whether in person, over the phone, by email, text, or instant messaging, or by any other electronic or non-electronic means. This includes your friends, family, co-workers, acquaintances, and strangers. And I also instruct you that you cannot do any research or make any inquiries about this case, whether online or by any other means. All right, so have a good weekend. And peace.
انتوا فهمتوا اللي بيحصل؟ بيقول لك القرار هيطلع بعد 3 ايام. انا عايز يحكموا على ال6 دي اصلا، يسيبوا امبر وجوني يحكموا على ال6 دي بعد الكلام اللي 3 ايام. مش حرام عليكي؟ مين اللي فاز؟ ده قالوا بعد 3 ايام. يا بعد الانتظار ده كله تقولنا بعد 3 ايام. يعني انا اعمل ايه فيكوا دلوقتي انا؟ وجايبين واحد دايس على راجل ليه كده؟ يعني علي عمال يترجم وتعب حاله، والراجل اسمه ابراهيم بوكر واخد وعمال يحذف الناس اللي عماله تشتم، وناس دخلت تشتم في بعض. بعد كل ده يقول لك 3 ايام. انا نفسي اتخنقت والله العظيم. ناس قاعده بقالها كام 3 ساعات، وقبلها 4 ساعات 7 ساعات قاعدين بنعمل بث عشان نسمع الحكم. يقول لك لا، ومستر بير عمال يضحك، مش عارف في ايه ماله ده. والله يا علي انا مش عارف، انا زعلت لك اكتر ما زعلت لاي حد بصراحه. السلام عليكم يا جوني. هذه المستشارة امبر الكسور جابته عود. والله حرام بعد الوقت ده كله، اقسم بالله. والله بعد 3 ايام يا نور. والله لا، وقالتها وجريت. حتى ما يتلناش احنا اسفين يا شباب، احنا اسفين لقناة داوود تك ولجمهور داوود تك. ما فيش، هي قالت الكلمتين وجريت. يلا يلا شباب، معلش بقى امسحوها فيا المرة دي. طيب وبكده نكون وصلنا لاخر حلقة النهاردة. متشكر لكل الموجودين، بتشكر لعلي، بتشكر لابراهيم، بتشكر كل اهل العراق والخليج واهالي الامازيغ، تونس والجزائر والمغرب والمصريين طبعا. واحنا كلنا اخوات، مفيش حاجة اسمها عرب ومش عرب. المهم هنلتقي في فيديو جديد، وحاليا سلام.
Either Johnny Depp or Amber Heard, that if you make a determination that there were compensatory damages or vice versa, I think that that if you have a finding of compensatory damages, meaning they're entitled to something, I mean, it might be as simple as $1 or something like that. And then the punitive would have to follow. And it'll be interesting to see if they both end up with only $1. I can't even imagine Amber winning on her cross claim of $100 million. That doesn't seem to be reasonable. Or even Johnny getting $50 million. But I think that he's been successful even if he loses his case. I think that in the court of public opinion, which is what he was really aiming toward, honestly, I think he wins either way.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the money is not an issue for either. It was all about let's clear our own names, and I think the jury probably gets that. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back with more right